I am here today for a very special segment for Academy Travel in one of my favourite counties, Kent, the heart and the garden of England. Here, surrounded by wooden hills and winding rivers, lies one of England's most evocative Tudor homes. As you can see, it is not vast, and it was never a royal palace. This is Hever Castle, a family estate steeped in ambition, peril, and politics of a dynasty that changed the course of English history.
Hever is so special to me because it is the childhood home of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second queen, but it was also home to Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII's fourth queen. She lived here in 1540 after her annulment to Henry VIII. There is so much history here, centuries worth. And I'm going to take you inside and introduce you to some of the fabulous rooms and some of the people who called it home. Before we go inside, I just want to pause here on this magnificent drawbridge. Now, this actually was originally the single moat, but it's now two-moated castle, and I'm standing here just by the 14th century portcullis. You can imagine back in the 16th century, a young Henry VIII coming here with his friends to court Anne Boleyn, who would become his second queen in her childhood home. So we're going to walk through under the portcullis, which is just a beautiful view, and into the inner courtyard. So here we are in the inner courtyard. So again, you can imagine Henry VIII coming in here with his friends, probably riding in, dismounting. The Boleyn apartments are just above us. So this is where the family would have been able to look down and view their royal visitor. It's pretty cold right now. It's actually spring, and yet it's quite brisk this morning. And you can really feel it in the beautiful shade of this courtyard. Now this, of course, mostly dates back to the 14th and 15th century, so it's still part of the original. That was actually reconstructed by the Astor family in the 19th and 20th centuries. And it's just wonderful that we see the beautiful Tudor timbered exterior here and that lovely contrast to the original stone and the stone gate here in the portcullis there on the right-hand side. So we're going to go in and I'm going to take you through and show you some of the original rooms that have been reconstructed inside Hever. So here I am in the inner hall at Hever Castle, and you can see this fantastic oak panelling in the minstrel gallery up there. Well, that didn't exist in the 16th century, and the reason why we know that this wasn't an inner hall is because of what's behind me, that window. Now, the curtains are covering it right now, but it's covered in soot. This was the original heart of all of Hever. This was the kitchen and the larder and the pantry. So this is where all the cooking for the Boleyn family was done. And of course, when Henry VIII visited, they would have to really kick into gear to prepare a proper royal feast for the monarch. So it's fantastic that we have this beautifully preserved room, even if it's not quite what it originally used to be. One of my favourite parts of Hever Castle, the very jewel of the entire estate, I am in the Great Hall. Now this is where the Boleyn family would have hosted King Henry VIII himself. This is basically the heart of their public life. This is where they would have shown off, and we can see so many elements there of Boleyn prestige and power. Originally, there would have been a hearth in the centre of this room, but Thomas Boleyn thought, well, that's a bit naff, and he decided to actually build this fantastic fireplace. And you have beautiful carvings. You also have the Boleyn family crest with the proud bull heads. But down here, you have something that's really fun. This is the show-off shelf. So this now, of course, you can see here, it's quite dark, but it's got some pewter in there just to give you a bit of an idea of what they would have had there. This is where they would have housed their silver and their gold plate to show everybody who was dining here just how powerful they were, just how wealthy they were, how well they were doing. As I say, the show-off shelf. And you can see here also fabulous tapestries, and you get a really great sense just of how they were able to communicate and to display their power. So if you're Henry VIII and you're visiting some of your courtiers and you live in that turbulent Tudor times when there are so many rebellions and uprisings, you're going to want all the protection you can get.
So when Henry VIII used to visit his courtiers in these grand estates like Hever, he'd bring not only bodyguards, but he'd bring his own padlock. This is actually one of Henry VIII's original padlocks, so he would take this with him. He would usually lock his bedroom chamber, so he would have locked his guest bedroom upstairs or wherever he was staying when he is visiting the Boleyns at Hever. This is such an incredible aspect of Henry VIII's reign to actually have this so well preserved. As I said, it wouldn't have been in the Great Hall, but it would have protected his person in his private sanctuary in his bedroom. We're now heading towards the private sphere of the Boleyn family home here at Hever. And I'm upstairs actually in the long gallery. Just above me you can see in the stained glass windows all the coats of arms that belong to the families who called Hever home throughout the centuries. From the Humphreys to the Boleyns to the Astors, right back even to Falstaff, the family who actually sold Hever to the Boleyn family in the 15th century. As I said, this is part of the private sphere, but this is also where the Boleyn family would have exercised, where they would have played games, where they would have relaxed. And it's also a symbol of their power and their wealth and their status. So Thomas Boleyn, the patriarch of the Boleyn family, actually built this in 1506. And he did so by lowering the ceiling of the Great Hall, which is just beneath us here. As you can see here, we've got portraits of so many Tudor personalities from Henry VII, Henry VIII, Margaret Beaufort, but this actually would have sort of been like this during the Boleyn family time. So they would have had portraits here just to show their friends and neighbours, any guests and visitors, how well connected they were. You can see all the Tudor stuff here. You can see Jane Seymour's gown here, and this is all from Wolf Hall, the actual TV series which is currently airing. And you can see this beautiful ceiling. This was actually installed during the 19th century when William Astor, the famous American billionaire, took over Hever, and he made it what it was because at that time Hever was incredibly run down. So he actually had this beautiful stuccoed ceiling made. And he actually brought it here by train, so he extended the train line so he could bring it here to Hever Castle and install it. So this wouldn't have been the kind of ceiling that Thomas Boleyn knew, but he certainly would have recognised this space as a really sacred part of the Boleyn family home. So I'm going to show you in the Walgrave room. This is now where Hever Castle houses two of Anne Boleyn's books of hours. And in fact, she actually wrote her name in these books, and she also wrote some pretty famous inscriptions. One of the most famous is Le temps viendra, the time will come. It's kind of a promise that she wrote in this book of hours to Henry VIII. These kind of love promises between them. So this is a very, very important textual piece of Anne Boleyn's life. We have this one on the right-hand side and on the left as well. But this is a special room. It doesn't just have the Book of Hours. It has a bedhead. This is Anne Boleyn's bedhead, the original from the 16th century. Look how beautifully and ornately carved that is. It's such a special room to come in here with these low timbered ceilings. You can actually imagine the Boleyns living here. This is part of the private apartments of the Boleyn family, and it's so amazing that we're able to come in here and view something that she once held herself. How special is that? So we are somewhere where not everybody gets to venture. This is the very best bedchamber in Hever Castle. Specifically, this would have been where Thomas Boleyn, the family patriarch, and his wife Elizabeth would have slept. It's also believed that when grown Anne Boleyn came back to Hever and she was courted aggressively, depending on how you view this story, by Henry VIII, this is very likely where she slept in the peace, just to get away from the chaos of the court. So you can just see how lavishly this would have been, furnished, just to really show the wealth and the splendor of the Boleyn family as they are on the rise due to their own merits. They are generation by generation improving their status. And this is one of the best ways that they can really show the status and the elevation to great lofty heights that they would eventually reach. So two guesses as to where we are here.
This is part of the new exhibition, the Boleyn Apartments. This is, of course, where the Boleyn family would have dined in private, because, of course, they're not going to dine in the Great Hall and waste all that space and, of course, use all the good furniture and all the good crockery. They're going to eat up here in the haven of the Boleyn private apartments. What I love about these rooms is they are covered in, of course, portraits of all the Tudor identities. In fact, Hever Castle has one of the largest collection of portraits outside the NPG in London, so it's an absolute privilege to see people like, well, Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII. Of course, they wouldn't have been on the wall watching the Boleyns as they ate back then, but here they are in all their glory. It's been so beautifully re-established here, and they're really recreating the original apartments. And you've got these fantastic fireplaces here. You've got the oak paneling, which wouldn't have quite looked like this in the day. And you've got a slightly lowered ceiling as well, but you get a real sense of the intimacy of this personal space where the Boleyns could be away from prying eye at court, even sometimes say from Henry VIII himself. So it's not all just glitz and glamour at Hever Castle, because it wasn't just a castle, it could also sometimes be used for defence, especially when it was part of the original Moat and Bailey, and of course during the certain wars, 100 Years' Wars, Wars of the Roses, every castle had to be able to defend itself. So here we are in part of the oldest part of the castle, and you can see here armour, weapons, instruments of death and destruction. And you can look out and you can just imagine having to defend this castle, having to be here to raise that portcullis if an enemy was approaching Hever. Where you are able to defend, where you have to raise the portcullis and lower it. But at the very end, we have something else which you don't often see, and I don't know if you can guess what it is, but if we go forward, it's the guardrobe. So this is one of the original toilets in the castle, as you can see. Very, very basic, but it's practical and it probably does the job. And it's just really fantastic that we have this. You get a sense of a different element of Hever's history and of its identity. So that concludes the inside of Hever Castle. Now I'm going to take you out into the beautiful grounds.
The gardens and grounds of Hever are absolutely magnificent, but they are not the same grounds that Anne Boleyn herself would recognise. Hever Castle and its grounds fell into decay after her execution in 1536, only to be rescued centuries later in 1903 by the millionaire William Waldorf Astor, an American with a romantic eye for Tudor history. Astor, a member of the very wealthy Astor family of New York, had a not very successful politic career in 1800s, but then he was appointed as ambassador to Italy, where he discovered his love of art, and in particular classical sculpture. He then upped sticks and moved to England, where he bought Hever Castle, a crumbling ruin at the time, and completely redesigned it and transformed it into the beautiful estate and grounds we see today. For example, we have the fantastic yew maize, which is planted with over 1,000 bushes and is a homage to the Tudor period. Mazes were popular in the 16th century, a type of formal garden, and the maze here designed by Astor is a wonderful example of that beauty. Stretching across 125 acres, the whole estate is a fusion of formal elegance and natural tranquility, and this layout, which is largely the vision of William Astor, was executed with meticulous attention to that historical style. The Italian garden, which includes the Grand Loggia, was designed to house Astor's collection of classical statues. Extending along the beautiful lakeside, this space transforms that Kentish landscape into a scene of Renaissance splendor. Though it's not Tudor in origin, it does reflect an Edwardian fascination with historical romances. The Italian-style loggia overlooks a 38-acre lake, and it was part of that grand restoration project. It evokes a Renaissance spirit, and it really is a nod to Astor's European travels rather than England and Tudors. Yet it is a symbolic function. It evokes a classical ideal of love and memory, and it frames the lake with its marble columns, statues, and a secluded atmosphere. To the west lies the Tudor garden, laid out in a series of geometric beds framed by beautifully, neatly clipped hedges. Now, this area was inspired by 16th century garden design. It aims to evoke the spaces that Anne Boleyn herself might have known. The water maze and the yew maze provide interactive elements. They evoke the Tudor delight in courtly games and courtly love. They mirror the twists of political fate that defined the Boleyn's rise and fall.
I thought I would end my tour of Hever the same way I always like to visit my own private annual pilgrimage to this great estate, by visiting this beautiful church here just outside the castle grounds, St. Peter's Church. This is where the Boleyn patriarch, Thomas Boleyn, who I did my PhD on, still lies. So I'm going to go in and just show you his magnificent tomb, and that will conclude our video today. So I always come here to pay my respects to the Boleyn patriarch, the man who made the Boleyns famous, who elevated them from a typical merchant family to the highest echelons. It wasn't all Anne Boleyn. Thomas played a huge part, and he is buried here in the peace and the beautiful tranquility of St. Peter's Church in Hever. As you can see, his tomb has this fantastic effigy on top. This is because he was very well respected. He was also a part of the Order of the Garter. So the actual effigy shows the Order of the Garter vestments, and it's just fantastic to actually gaze on top. You can see where the original floor of St. Peter's Church was, because obviously this is sunken in. So this entire floor has been raised. So not completely original, but this has been put together throughout the centuries. Certainly the top part is original, and then it's kind of been refashioned over the centuries. But the effigy on top is still just absolutely exquisite, and a wonderful testament to a man who really did have a huge impact on the Tudor period.